Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the fourth webinar in the series, Educating the Future Singer Post-COVID-19. My name is Elizabeth McDonald, and I'm a sessional lecturer in voice performance at the University of Toronto Faculty of Music in Toronto, Canada. This event is hosted by Women on the Verge, a trio that I'm a member of with my colleagues and friends, American soprano Emily Martin and Canadian pianist Catherine Tremills. We are female musicians, performers, teachers, and mentors who want to have this very important conversation today. To learn more about Women on the Verge and all of our past and upcoming projects, I encourage you to visit our website at www.womenontheverge.ca. Before I introduce our moderator and panelists, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Here in Canada, we always begin our community gatherings and performances with a land acknowledgement to recognize the traditional caretakers of the place in which we are gathering. For example, today, I am coming to you from my home in Prince Edward County, Ontario, but I recognize that I am on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat. Today, we are coming together virtually from so many different places, and so it's obviously not possible to recognize all the lands from where everyone is tuning in from. As musicians and artists, we are really storytellers using music to tell our stories. And for this reason, I think it's important for us to recognize the original storytellers of all the different lands across this continent, as well as express our gratitude to them for being caretakers of the land that we now have the privilege to create upon, perform, and share our art. And with that, I will pass it on to my fellow Women on the Verge member, Dr. Emily Martin, who will be facilitating today's discussion. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Elizabeth. Hi, my name is Emily Martin, and I'm an assistant professor at Bucknell University, where I teach voice and opera. We are excited for you to join us for part 2 of this series, Black, Indigenous, and Persons of Color Representation in Our Field. Since the murder of George Floyd on May 25, 2020, our society is recognizing the immediate need to tackle the huge issue of systematic racism and white supremacy in our world. Women on the Verge has worked to recognize underrepresented female composers, but we as a trio have not done the work to amplify Black, Indigenous, and persons of color voices and the continued work to fight to dismantle racism. This horrendous act of murder reminded us that it is our responsibility to educate ourselves so that we are better equipped to stand alongside our Black, Indigenous, and persons of color colleagues, both as performers, but more importantly as educators. It is important to call out the fact that our industry and our art form in general has known a practice of racism and discrimination on and off stage, and we must work to change the racially discriminatory practices in our field. This is the beginning of a huge conversation that needs to happen so that our art can continue to thrive and truly create equitable opportunities for all people. We do not have the answers, but are looking for articulation for these problems to have better conversations. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has already dove into this conversation in our Facebook group of the same name, Educating the Future Singer Post-COVID-19. We will be answering some of those questions today, but again, this is just the beginning, and we commit to continuing the conversation in the months and years to come. We will continue to use your questions in future webinars, so please keep them coming. If you have questions today during the webinar, please drop them in the Q&A at the bottom right of your screen, and I will be working to include those questions later in the discussion. We also have a chat room, which many of you have already participated in, featured on the bottom left of our screen that will be moderated by 2/3 of Women on the Verge, Canadian soprano Elizabeth McDonald, who you have already met, and Canadian pianist Catherine Tremills. There's Catherine. Yep, and Elizabeth. If you haven't already done this already, we would love if you would please introduce yourself and let us know where you are tuning in from. As we get started with this discussion, we recognize that the conversation and the work to bring true equity to our field is huge. So we would like to provide a framework for our conversation today. This conversation today will focus on the experiences of our colleagues and their thoughts on tangible and positive ways to support our students and their education. And now I'd like to introduce our wonderful panel who are coming from all over the world, hence the time change for the webinars, and I will introduce them in alphabetical order. First, we have Sara Constant, flautist, writer and editor, and curator at Music Gallery. Hi, Sara. Next, we have Anthony R. Green, composer, performer, social justice artist, and associate artistic director of Castle of Our Skins. Thanks, Anthony. Hi. Next, Marion Newman, Kwagiulth Stalo, First Nations, English, Irish, and Scottish, a professional mezzo-soprano. Hi. And last, but certainly not least, Alexandra Smither, soprano and founder of PushBack Collective. And we're so happy to have you, Ali. So before we dive into questions, I'd like to go around the room and get everyone's initial thoughts and opening remarks. Ali, why don't we start with you?
Thanks so much, Emily. So I just wanted to start my remarks today by saying how thankful I am to Women on the Verge for inviting me to be here today. Elizabeth has known me for almost 10 years, since I was 18 years old, and has always been one of my great supporters, and I appreciate her so much. So, as Emily said, my name is Ali Smither, and I primarily work as a soprano. I studied at U of T with Elizabeth, and then went on to Rice for my master's. I'm currently a DMA performance candidate at City University, New York. So we're here today to talk about BIPOC or BIPOC representation in classical music. One of the many journeys I've been on personally during the past couple of years has been the power of language, how the words you choose to represent a subject are as important as the subject itself. In working recently with a mentor, myself and a group were asked, why are you framing this conversation around the minority? Which just about stopped me in my tracks. Because he was right. The minority, the sliver of BIPOC people in the room, are so often the subject of fixation in these discussions. But they are not the actual problem. Whiteness is the problem. So as I continue to speak today and we continue to push and grow and learn and listen, I'd invite all of you to consider the language that you use around these quote unquote issues. Are we only calling them issues of BIPOC representation, or are we also becoming comfortable by calling them by their other name, their more uncomfortable names? Whiteness, overt whiteness, favored whiteness, or all-consuming whiteness. By accepting discomfort in how we name things in proximity to ourselves, we can foster a more potent accountability. Language is one of the most potent forms of accountability. So I must have written about 5 pages of remarks. There's so many things I want to talk about. But since I don't want to just talk straight for 10 minutes, I really want to talk about grounding our work, specifically as it pertains to white people in classical music, who I'm assuming are the majority of you listening right now. So let me first say unequivocally that living in a minority body, specifically a non-white body, is a form of activism in of itself. Let's not forget at any point that non-white bodies should not need to partake in activism. The system should not be broken. The system should not favor whiteness. The very act of living, of thriving in the system as it exists now, is a form of activism. So asking a BIPOC artist to ground their work, that's ridiculous, because their act of living is the grounding. But for white people, sort of what the heck am I talking about? To be specific, what I am talking about right now is the efforts white people in classical music take in the name of racial justice. I think you can sort of begin to think of this through 2 examples: grounding a specific work or action, or grounding yourself doing the work in our industry in general. The former will definitely come more easily if the latter is already happening. So much of what I see in the classical music community is a fetish almost for social justice music TM, or actions that are done in the name of racial justice without much follow through. Actions not grounded in anything except an attempt to either get a grant or maintain face or check a box. Much of the time it's complicated because we look at these as a step in the right direction, and on the surface sometimes they are. It's excellent to see different stories on stage, but it's only really excellent when these works, their creators, and their processes are equitable. We need more of this done well, more of it imagined, created, funded for, and done by Black and brown bodies. More Black and brown joy instead of just trauma. Creating spaces where BIPOC creators can make what they want, not cater to what you think they are. But how do you, a white person who has been engaging with this kind of work, know whether or not your quote unquote social justice project in classical music is checking a box or if it's grounded? The quick answer is if your action exists in a void separate from the rest of your life, that's probably a no-go. But I wanted to provide a small framework for how you can begin to think about this. So when I'm looking at an action or a project, I ask myself these questions. First, I ask, is the primary purpose of what I'm doing to serve myself? To serve or salvage my own image? To get that grant? Does this action actually lend itself towards larger structural change? Will my commitment to this cause continue after the last review comes in? Will my teaching reflect the values I'm putting on stage? How does this work actually connect with the community I'm portraying? Am I writing a piece about a community but not connecting to that community? If I am, have I paid them? Am I claiming to bring awareness but not connecting songs to any direct actions that will benefit people? Is the awareness I'm doing really the awareness I'm creating doing anything more than placating the people I'm singing to into thinking they have actually done something concrete? If I can't answer all those questions, it's all right. I mean, I would love to see every work be a social justice work, but not every work, not every performance is activism. But if you're going to be billing your work as social justice work, or if you're thinking to yourself privately in the quiet of your home that this was the work, I've done the work, I hope that there's follow through. I hope that you haven't programmed a concert of BIPOC works while not addressing discrimination within your school. In terms of grounding yourself generally more in the work of racial justice, I would say the first thing you need to do is see clearly who you are and what you're doing. Reading a book is a step. Programming one work by a BIPOC composer is a step. But I think what I'd really like to see is work that is more than intellectual. What I want to see is white people engaging in work that is communally uncomfortable, that is physically and emotionally taxing. Yes, you've read that book on anti-racism, but have you called a meeting with your dean that there are no Black professors at your school? Have you risked your comfort by publicly, not in a text, not in an email, but publicly backing up that person at the conference talking about anti-racism work? Have you given up an opportunity so someone else could have their first? Have you given up sleep and stress to leverage your power for someone else? Do you know the small organizations within your city doing the grueling, taxing work of anti-racism every day in housing equality, food equality, homelessness? Have you contacted them, donated, volunteered? You may say, oh, I'm tired, I don't have time, and I know that. But do we really think that the activists on the ground doing all this, who are mostly brown and Black women, have the time? We need to start taking a bit of their tiredness from the people who are on the ground not sleeping and doing the work. If we have time to go see a concert, we have the time to figure out how to actually engage with our communities. Because also, once you become involved with the small orgs in your city, once you start doing this work, once you connect your larger organizations with them, you'll start to see how your community actually functions and how real social justice work happens. You'll start to understand what small actionable steps look like. We need to stop pretending that our music or our classes that we teach are more than they are. If we start being honest with ourselves and see our reach and the niche nature of what we do, we can actually begin to do real work within that. Neoliberal circles within classical music have been stuck because we thought we were already doing a good job. And I would love to see the end of this false sense of superiority when most of our actions that we do placate a community into thinking they've done more work than they have. So I'd love to not be told that the world has been changed when we haven't looked beyond the closed doors of our professional circles, either in performance or in our audiences. I realize the title of this is Educating the Future Singer, and I consider what I just spoke about to be integral to that. Teaching young musicians to wildly reimagine what the scope of community is, teaching them accountability in their actions and their words and performances, and not letting them get away with surface productions of solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Great words. I would like to invite Sara next for her opening statement. Oh no, sorry, Anthony, excuse me. Anthony? Sorry, Sara.
That's okay, no problem. We're here to make mistakes and no one is perfect. So thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for having me be part of such a wonderful cohort of artists. So yes, it's important that the quantity of these panels has increased exponentially, mostly because of the conversations that have occurred after the death of George Floyd. However, it's more important that the momentum that has caused these panels will continue, hopefully leading to regular panels, regular conversations, and ideally constant action and regular internal or personal check-ins about these actions. While talking is great and can prepare all of us mentally, emotionally, and spiritually to do the work, it mustn't be forgotten that doing the work is the only way we can enact change. Socially, those who are marginalized by their geographies, economies, and identities, these people aren't immediately benefiting from privileged people, including myself, posting Black Lives Matter imagery on social media and only talking in panels or writing articles. The other day, I spent the morning donating money directly to Black trans men and women who are suffering financially. And throughout this pandemic, I've been donating money to organizations doing direct work that has an immediate impact. Additionally, sharing the websites of these organizations helps tremendously in a bigger way than we can ever know. Sharing the Cash App handles of people who are suffering and need $10, $15, $25, whatever, this impact is far greater than we can imagine. So what's the equivalent in music? Commissioning BIPOC composers and creatives, that's Black, Indigenous, Latinx, people of color. Commissioning BIPOC composers and creatives. This is direct work that has a direct impact. If you're a composer yourself, you can commission BIPOC poets, librettists, and other writers for your song cycles. You can commission performers, spoken word artists, and other performing artists to realize your visions. If you're administrators, you can pay BIPOC web designers, BIPOC transcribers, bloggers, and other workers to render your services. If you're in need of advice regarding whatever it is discussed today, then pay consulting fees to BIPOC artists to answer your questions, because their answers will come from their entire life's experience, regardless of how much they've been involved in academic research. If money is not an option now, then liking, sharing, starting trends, confronting your professors, your students, your mentors, your family, your friends, and your immediate network about the existence of BIPOC artists and their survival in spite of overt and covert attempts to silence them, these actions also are valid and necessary. Now, some might be wondering, what are some of the digital sources that can be liked, shared, reposted, engaged with in a variety of different ways? Well, some of this material will be included in the Women on the Verge resource list that will be mentioned today and shared online. But I'd also like to take this moment to specifically draw your attention to two Instagram accounts. The first is @ComposingIsRacist, all one word. And the second is @OperaIsRacist, all one word, which is probably more apropos to the majority of you listening and partaking in this panel. While some of, or most of you probably already follow one or both of these accounts, or perhaps have seen the posts, I'd like to mention that these platforms are used to anonymously share stories of racism and otherism that was experienced or witnessed within these communities. Here's an example from the @ComposingIsRacist account. Quote, "A well-known choral composer and arranger came and visited my ensemble to do a one-day improvisation workshop. During the process, they told my colleague, who's white, to sing it like you're Black, and then went on to explain how Black singers have so much more resonance because they have an extra hinge in their jaw. They then remarked how so much great music came out of slavery, and to remember that when they're protesting," end quote. And this post was from June 30th. Pretty crazy, right? In fact, I feel like during this whole pandemic, there have been a slew of wonderful, wonderful posts and infographics that have been shared, especially on Instagram. I haven't been engaging too much with Facebook, to be honest. But I'd also like to draw attention to a post from Cam_Alexandra, and it is about cultural appropriation versus appreciation. On her Twitter, she wrote, "If you truly don't understand cultural appropriation, imagine writing a paper and getting an F on it, and then someone plagiarizes your paper and gets an A on it, and extra credit." In her Instagram post, she then goes on to define cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation in very articulate and succinct ways. And for sake of time, I'll just direct you to that, but I'm not going to read all of the material because it's a little bit lengthy. With that, I'd like to say a few words about my practice and post-COVID performance practice in general. I'm not a bel canto vocalist, but my practice includes composing, social justice artistry, and performing. And as a performer, piano is my main instrument, but my most recent interactive performances have also included experimental vocalization. Last year, I explored the connection between the Black psyche and the voice for a conference in Istanbul titled "The Multivalent Voice in Transcultural Music Making." The main thesis of my lecture performance is that Black people have never stopped talking, screaming, writing, singing, shouting, and using their voices to express their grievances with society, systemic racism, and injustice. And will not stop, even though not enough people take the time to both truly listen to us and actively fight for justice in a consistent, sustainable manner. In this paper, I quoted Audre Lorde, a Caribbean American who described herself as a Black lesbian mother, warrior, and poet. Of her many quotes regarding voice, these are among my favorite. As I recite, I'll pause for us to just take these words in. So the first quote, "My silences had not protected me. Your silence will not protect you." The second quote, "I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal, and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood." Number 3, when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard or welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid, so it's better to speak. That one's my favorite. And lastly, I write for those women who do not speak, for those who do not have a voice because they were so terrified, because we are taught to respect fear more than ourselves. We've been taught that silence would save us, but it won't. While these quotes don't directly deal with vocal performance in the way we all know, there are lessons within Lorde's quotes that vocalists can use for their personal growth as well as for the growth of their practice. And here are some. Firstly, whenever a piece of music by a well-respected, well-known dead white European composer is performed, the voice of a Black composer is silent. The voice of an indigenous composer is silent. The voice of a Latinx composer is silent. The voice of a composer who is a person of color is silent. We so often think about our programming in terms of narrative, audience entertainment, ability, etc., but we rarely as performers think about our programming in terms of whose voices are we silencing? Whose stories are we not telling? At what expense? Oddly enough, this form of silencing has protected many vocalists and performing artists. But the reality is this: we're entering a point now in these COVID times and then in the post-COVID times when this form of silencing will not protect you as a performer. And we all should think about this. Secondly, many people make arguments for not programming music by Black composers or female composers or BIPOC composers, and such arguments range from appropriation and lack of quality to audience misunderstanding and betraying donors. But if we use Lord as our model, we can safely conclude that this music must be performed even at the risk of having it be bruised or misunderstood. And that can be a tough reality pill, but we should always keep Lord as our model when considering this. Thirdly, and for me this is the best lesson to learn, when vocalists use their platform to enact any amount of social change, they might be afraid that they will be misunderstood or worse. But post-COVID-19, the vocalist will enter into a new world where remaining silent on social change will also cause a type of fear. So it will be better to use your voice in some way to enact positive change. Lastly, and this is especially for white vocalists and white people in power positions, when you do the work, when you speak truth to power and speak equity in spaces that are silent, you are speaking for those who don't have that voice. You're speaking for those who don't have that access. You're speaking for those who aren't taken seriously when they do have the voice and do have the access. So please, when we get out of this, use your voice as a tool for justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony, very much. Sara.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sara. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a flute player who primarily studied classical music and currently play a mixture of things, which includes classical music, but is also largely contemporary classical and experimental music from a variety of genres. So the title of this session is BIPOC representation. And I think for me, where that starts is asking what we mean when we talk about representation in music. And I think that Ali and Anthony have already outlined a lot of really great ways in which we can think about representation as tangible actions. But for me, representation relies on two things. The first is what is called this performative loop of empowerment. Where I can see somebody who is empowered, who looks like me, and because of that, I can feel empowered, and then I can be empowered to do work in my community. And then the second thing is this idea that representation in our organizations helps change policy and change communities. And I really want that first thing. I really want to see tangible evidence of people trying to improve the way that our music is presented and our music is disseminated and the way that artists are supported. But I also wanted to spend this time now to focus on that second thing, which is the structural side, which is to take a look at how we are doing things in our community and what it is about the communities that we're creating that keeps shutting people out and keeps making people frustrated. So for example, in the structural side of things, I wanted to take a look at what it means to study music in an institution in a place like North America. When we look at these institutions and when we look at what it means to be a part of them as students or as educators, it's a situation where a very specific set of values around music making are upheld, around what good music is, around what higher learning music is or smart music is, around what publicly fundable music is, and around who that music is for. And it creates a process where students and early career artists are expected to make huge financial, social, and physical commitments towards upholding those values and upholding a very specific definition of good music making. So I'm talking about racism here, but I'm also speaking more generally about exclusivity in music institutions, and that's because those things for me are very related. That's because classical music talks a lot of big talk about merit and about talent and about our great artists and great works. But when we have an exclusive idea of what great music is, and that idea is coming from a colonial place and from a white place and from a European classical music place, then it's automatically already about racism as well. And when the people inside our music institutions don't think about understanding race as a key part of their jobs and what their jobs are, then whatever they say about any kind of music is automatically already connected to racism. So we really need this idea of representation in terms of diversifying programming and diversifying what people think of when they think of artists of color, because we are obviously not a monolith. But I want to challenge people who are embedded in institutions to take it a step further as well, and to think and change how you are doing things. How are you talking about music? And how are you talking about what makes someone a good musician? What kinds of knowledge do you count as real knowledge or valid knowledge? What types of artistic directions are you encouraging people to pursue? How are you pursuing real artistic relationships rather than just looking at people of color and trying to include them in doing what you are already doing without thinking about how you are doing that action? For me, my merit as an artist and my ability as a classical musician or as a musician in general is not separable from my identity. And that doesn't mean, I want to be clear, that I want to make only autobiographical art or art about my identity or have my work labeled in that way. But for me, what it means is that I don't want to feel like I need to hide or erase or forget about who I am when I walk into a venue or an audition or a concert hall or a school. And I don't want to feel like when I'm in these spaces, I'm totally vulnerable and alone in a field that wants to use my work as an artist without having understood me or grounded that process at all. And going back to that structural side, what it means for me is that if classical music schools want to be in this business of teaching artistic merit, which is the business that they say that they are in, then they are absolutely also obligated to create spaces that honor and allow for and understand these types of intersections of identity. Because otherwise I feel like they're failing everybody except for the people who can already easily disengage with identity issues, because the world has already been made easy for them and the world has already been kind to them. So I think for me, that would be my challenge to people who are already embedded and already insiders in these music institutions. Let's get our arts organizations to make a commitment towards representation in programming, but also towards changing the processes that we have for doing things, for organizing concerts, for planning courses, for evaluating people as artists, and for creating collaborative projects. And I think then we can work towards having richer artistic communities where all artists can feel like they can be themselves, where they can work together, and where they can pursue the work that they want to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara, very much. Marion.
Hello, I'm Marion Newman. I am a mezzo-soprano. I am Kwagiulth and Stallo, English, Irish, and Scottish mix. I studied piano as a kid, and I went through my bachelor's degree at University of Victoria under Dr. Robin Wood. And during some of that earlier education, I had to take voice as a second instrument. And it was mostly for fun, and also so that I could understand how singers breathe and what it means to add words to melody. And I totally fell in love with the art form because it is storytelling and you're never working alone. I think that was the thing. I really, really love teamwork. And so I switched to singing, and I did a master's degree at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music many years ago. And since then, I have been performing standard Western classical rep a lot, oratorio through opera, and a lot of art song. And more recently, I have found myself being the first person to sing new roles, operas that tell Indigenous stories. And that has been, activism has always been a part of my life. It comes through my family on both sides. However, finding my own footing within activism has been through telling Indigenous truths through opera. And I have been asked before, why opera for an Indigenous singer? Because people thought that it was incongruous in some way. And my standard answer has become that pretty much, I think every culture all over the world tells story through song in some way. And in my Kwagiulth culture, we have potlatch ceremonies, which are ceremonies that cover a lot of life, government, etc. But they also tell stories through song, through movement, with costumes, with amazing masks. And that is basically what opera is to me. And so it's not such a stretch. And I think that people are starting to really understand that better nowadays. In thinking about opening remarks, I ended up just writing several words that popped into my head when thinking about the nature of this particular webinar. And one of them is discomfort. This time that we're in right now, where people are actually really focusing on racism and how it affects all of us, but in very different ways, I think is becoming a bigger deal because we are uncomfortable. And sitting in that discomfort makes us want to do something. And the first thing we do, hopefully, is to listen and to realize how much we don't know, all of us, and how much we still need to learn, and the different areas in which, I mean, as an Indigenous person, I have my focus has mainly been Indigenous, but there are many different people and different ways of being that I still have to learn a lot about. And so recognizing that there's a lot that I don't know puts me in a place of discomfort and makes me want to listen, makes me want to learn. Courage. It takes a lot of courage to have these conversations and to hear some of the really difficult language that surrounds racism. What might sound like name calling, but how else do we recognize, do we share with each other what our discomforts are, and what the hierarchy has been for so long, and how do we find ways of changing that if we don't name it. Consultation. In this time of great pause, where we are no longer on stages, I found myself no longer learning roles and performing them for a little while, but it has turned out that a lot of people have been paying attention to some of the pieces that I've been a part of, and have come to the pre-concert chats or the after-concert chats, and have these discussions. There's a real interest in learning more, and in consultation, and in asking the communities who are being represented how they want to be represented. And that is a role that I'm just starting to step into quite fully right now, as I'm not doing anything else. And I'm learning as I go, but I know you would probably never believe this, especially by the time I'm finished talking, but I used to be the person who showed up and witnessed. I listened, I barely said anything. And one day during a rehearsal where something was really difficult, the way things were being done, I opened my mouth and I had the words. And I've never stopped talking since. And it is a relief to be able to express in words and out loud to people who are listening what my experience is as a person of color, as well as it gives me strength. And I think it's because I realize I have been doing all that listening, and I'm glad that when I speak, I realize I'm speaking the words of many people who have come before me, and I've been learning from them. And so my ideas are formed by the people that touched me, that made me feel, and that I see as mentors, as leaders. And so, yeah, I just want to say that it's a time of remembering out loud and sharing that with others. Safe space and support for Black, Indigenous, Latino people of color. What does it mean for a space to be safe? And at the beginning of rehearsals, there's usually, here in Canada anyway, there's usually a chat that is about safe space and who to talk to if you have any issues. And it's something that sprung out of the #MeToo movement, but it extends to what is safety in many, many ways. And I think when those say what is a safe space sort of chats were developed, it was for the status quo. And the status quo doesn't actually include people of color generally. So, and that's not out of anyone trying to be mean or anything like that. It's just not realizing that we navigate differently. We have to navigate differently. We hear things differently. And how what people say lands on us is different. So making spaces safe means, and I'm just going to dip into the representation, means having leadership in the room that looks like us, that has our experience, and that can catch, that has the authority to speak up and catch those moments that are uncomfortable for us as well. And I think I've navigated in this business for over 20 years, and a lot of situations that I've been in are things that I've just swallowed, taken in, gone home later to process it in whatever way. And more recently, having a director, librettist, conductor in the room who look like me and who have had similar, if not the same experiences that I have, has meant that I get to the other end of the gig and just feel like a performer instead of feeling like the person who's holding so much weight. And that is so important, I think, especially for the singers who are coming after me, who are younger. I want to make that safe space for them so that they don't have to develop a way of relating what is uncomfortable, which is something that I have developed out of need, because there for a long time was no one there to speak for me. Cultural learning is another point that I wanted to speak to. There's a lot of interest in performing works that are about people that we aren't, or making sure that there are other stories of the community that we actually live in. Like, I live in Toronto, and walking down the street, I pass every kind of person all day long. And those stories are not represented in opera because the people who were writing the operas that are part of the canon weren't having those experiences themselves. They weren't the people that were being represented. They were mostly men, and or almost completely, and generally white European. So there's that interest in telling those stories, but not necessarily understanding how to go about it. And so how do you learn someone's culture? Well, Google is a really good friend. If you Google your city and the various cultures that you're interested in learning about, there is theater, there are art shows, there are dance performances going on that are put on by the people of those communities. And so they're showing you how they want to represent themselves. And I think that that's a really good place to start learning. And it's also a place to take apart, to challenge, which is another one of my big words that I wrote on my page, to challenge what our pre-existing ideas are of different people. And as an Indigenous person, I know there are a lot of pre-existing ideas of what is Native, what is Native American, what is First Nations, what is Inuit, what is Métis. And in fact, growing up, some of those ideas were things that I realized I held because they are so prevalent, and they put us all in this one pot of indigeneity without recognizing that we have differences. And it's one of the reasons I put in my bio Kwagiulth and Stalo First Nations, so that it's not just general First Nations from Canada, but that it's very specific. And my culture from the northern tip of Vancouver Island and the Fraser Valley on the mainland in British Columbia, or what we now call British Columbia, that those are two very specific cultures, and they come with ceremonies and ways of being, ways of living that go with the land that these cultures grew on. And they're extremely different from the cultures here in Toronto. And so to lump us all into the same category of just Indigenous is a bit crazy. So challenging our ideas of what we think that is. Like, don't take it from the movies or or the many writers who wrote about us without any kind of consultation before. And the main thing that I think really strikes me about this particular webinar is that education is a focus, and that a lot of what I learned about how to engage in activism through opera is stuff that I learned after school. And there is a lot of interest in that I'm hearing. How do we get young Indigenous singers onto the stages, and how do we get them to university, and how do we make our space more welcoming to them? And so that is something I would like to discuss. I don't have all the answers. I'm still learning and figuring things out. I did go through the education system myself, but that was one avenue. And I think that there can be many, many other ways of making the space inviting. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Marion, so much. I'd like to invite all of our panelists to please turn on your cameras and mics, and we're going to ask some questions, and we're really excited to hear what you have to say. Okay, I'd like to start with the first question, and everybody's kind of already talked about this just a little bit, but I'd love to hear more. And Marion, I'm actually going to start with you. You mentioned it a bit in your statement. What does representation mean, and who gets to decide that?
Right. Representation is a word that means a lot of things. So actually figuring out what the definition is according to who's saying representation, I think is something that we could discuss. When I think of representation, I think of myself representing my communities. And as an Indigenous person, it has been instilled in me since I was born that when I go out into the world, I represent my family, I represent my community, and I need to behave in a good way. I need to always keep them in mind, and in all of my movements, in all of what I do, which I think is a form of learning morals, a form of learning how to be a good person in this world and to care about others and to not just focus on yourself. Representation in opera is who are we seeing on the stages? And this was touched on by some of the other panelists really, really beautifully. It's, as a young singer, I remember going to a concert of Kiri Te Kanawa, and it was an outdoor concert in Victoria at Royal Roads University, and the setting was like, the backdrop was the ocean with greenery and peacocks. It was literally like Wonderland. And seeing that woman on stage was like, oh, she looks like me. So sorry, that it's really important. Apologies. But if you needed to know how important it is to see someone who looks like you in the thing that you won't really want to do, this is how important that is. And it's important for me to let people know who I am, what my culture is, so that I am representing and making this space a little more welcoming for the younger singers who are coming up. How we represent, yeah, anyway, I think those are the two biggest things, is just like, that I'm thinking of, but also representation in leadership and in who our teachers are. If a person has your experience, they will treat you differently than if you seem foreign to them. And so it's really important that we have leadership that can speak to other leadership about how they are behaving and how they are seeing us. And so, yeah, I open this up to others.
Can I jump in? I would just like to say that with regards to representation, there's this phenomenon that happens, unfortunately, that And it happens because there are so many white people represented on stages, in magazines, in concert halls, in books. And then when we leave that in society in general, you look on a TV commercial and it's mostly straight white people, and you watch television and it's lots of white people, and it's movies, lots of white people. There's the hashtag Hollywood so racist, right? And what this ends up yielding is that when one Black person does something wrong, or one Indigenous person does something wrong, then that's a representation of every Black person and every Indigenous person, right? And this is why we have Indigenous people stereotyped in television shows as the drunks, and Black people stereotyped in movies as the thugs, right? And this, we need to keep this in mind. You know, Sara said BIPOC people aren't a monolith, and we are not a monolith. When one white person does something wrong, President of the United States, we're not saying all white people are horrible, right? No. So when one Black person, when one Indigenous person, Latinx person, person of color does something wrong, let's not make these blanket generalizations.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And one thing I wanted to add also is that when we think about this in the context of programming and curating and music making, that like absolutely when we look at representations of culture and representations of people from different identities in our music, that what is probably the most important for me is that it's coming from our own terms, and that it's not saying, it's not asking people of color to speak to their identities in order to be heard, and it's not saying this is a certain type of music that we want to hear from you, or we want or that or asking us to speak on behalf of our communities, because I don't think that I can speak on behalf of all people of color, or on behalf of all Asian people, or on behalf of all women or queer people or anything like that. I only know my own experience and my own identity as an artist. And if that's something that's not going to be respected in a collaboration, or when I'm asked to work for you or something, or to present my work, then I don't really feel like my artistic work is being heard.
Yeah, and just to go off what Sara said, I mean, I love what all of you say, and Marion, you are that for so many people. All of you are. I think what a lot of people don't realize is when there isn't representation in the room, the minute anyone who isn't white walks in is doing 3 times their job, 3 times what's on their contract. Like, you walk into the room knowing that you're gonna have to field every single question about representation or diversity or inclusion, not just through the organization, but people's own insecurities. Like, when you walk into that rehearsal room, and when you walk into a rehearsal room that's filled with people who aren't white, which I've had happen twice, you don't have that feeling. And that is so liberating. All of a sudden, I don't have to explain like the sort of basis of all this work, and you get to talk about the nuances that are within your identity as a non-white person without being labeled as a non-white person. And that is so liberating, and it actually allows you to do your work better. Not that that's the capitalist end goal, but yeah, there needs to be more brown and black people and queer people and Asian people and Latino people in the room, because it allows us to get to that next level instead of just pandering to the white majority that we have to do every day.
I would also add that I am passing in certain circles and at certain times when someone isn't expecting that they're going to be sitting among Indigenous people. And because of the idea of their idea that they hold in their head of an Indigenous person, that they're going to be, you know, wearing buckskin maybe, or riding a horse or something like that. It is so baked into them that they don't realize that the person sitting next to them or across from them could be Indigenous, because I'm wearing a lace top and just, you know, talking about politics or how good this food is or whatever. So I think that representation and being open about it when you feel safe to do so is really important, so that people can understand that they hold those ideas that are incorrect. So yeah, I think that that's another reason why we need to let people know that we're here. I mean, it's so many eggy moments where somebody has told a bad joke about an Indigenous person, and I'll be like, so that was rude, and this is why, because that was sort of about me, but not at all, because whatever your joke is wrong and hurtful, and it is a great way to get conversations happening. Speaking of discomfort, but and I've never had an issue or a situation like that where someone hasn't come back later and after having done some thinking and said, thank you for challenging me. And I'm learning, and I'm realizing that it's not just us, people that represent the person, whoever bumbled a little, but that there are a lot of others here too. And that we're just not being seen.
With this idea of change, and all of you have already said a little bit about needing to see these faces in the room and needing to share those experiences together, which is so valuable. I wanted to also ask the question, how do we go about creating deeper structural change within our institutions so that more diverse representation of good music is taught, read about in the syllabus? So if Sara, I would love to start with you since you talked a little bit about it in your opening statement.
Sure, yeah. I think, institutions, especially if we're talking about academic institutions, which is maybe close to where your question is directed, it's complicated and difficult for people to feel like they can act in this kind of community, because teachers want to support their students, and sometimes that has meant, in my experience, teachers expressing that they feel trapped or bound to certain ways of thinking about music and certain syllabi, because they want their students to be accepted to the next graduate program or whatever. But I think that two things to that probably. The first is that I think it's really crucial to talk to your own networks in terms of trying to navigate the changing how institutions do things. If you feel like your students are not going to get anywhere in their careers because you want to diversify your syllabus, that's a huge problem. And that's not a problem only within your course, but it's a problem within your school. It's a problem with intake at other schools. So you need to be speaking to your colleagues about it. You need to be speaking to the administrative staff and the people who are doing intake at your own school and other schools about it. And you need to be gathering resources for your students, so that you know which other schools will accept them if they're interested in something different than the most conservative Eurocentric canon stuff that people are offering. And then the other thing I would say is really to just do it. Like, it actually doesn't take that much work to read some books yourself and to encourage different kinds of scholarship for your students. And the truth of it is, especially when we're talking about digital media and that kind of learning today, is that if as a flute player, I want to learn the Mozart flute concerto, and that's important for where I want to go in my career, and it's not featured as much as it could be on your syllabus, there's a million places everywhere in the world where I can learn about that. No problem. Every flute player in the world knows that. I can get lessons anywhere. It's totally fine. Don't worry about me. But if I want to learn about the specifics of who I am as an artist, and how that relates to where I'm living and how that relates to the scene that I'm in, that's something that only you can offer me in your class. So I think we can do better for our students there. There are more important things that you can do for me as your student than teaching you the classics, because the resources with the classics are super easy to find. You need to be doing that one extra step to get people thinking critically about the music that we're engaging with and how we're doing it also.
If I may, how we look at Western classical music and who has the right to perform it and why is something I've been thinking a lot about. And I'm thinking about it because the question of what is Indigenous classical music has come up quite a lot in the last few years. And I personally believe that anything I perform is with my Indigenous point of view. So therefore it is Indigenous. I also just want to put out there, and I've been saying this a lot lately, so sorry if I'm repeating myself, but when colonization happened all over the world, the cultures that existed there were replaced. And the people who survived that colonization had their languages replaced, had their ceremonies replaced, had their music replaced, et cetera, et cetera. And so when it was replaced, we were given the music that is Western classical music. And therefore, I have every right to perform that. And from whatever my point of view is, because we managed to survive. And so now it's mine. I'm not going to try and I don't know, I guess, defend why I want to do that. I wanted to learn how to sing like an opera singer. And yes, I do also engage in traditional music, Kwagiulth traditional music, but that's for me and it's my culture. And we're still in a time of relearning what was forcibly taken from us. And so when I choose to share that is up to me. And it is up to the individual. And I'm not speaking for my entire community. I'm speaking as an individual. When I'm comfortable with sharing that it's up to me to offer it. And really, when I'm performing, I want to use my mezzo-soprano skills because that's what I went to school for. And that's what I've stuck with this job for so long because I love it. So I'm just putting that out there.
So I would like to jump in and add that as educators and as students as well, we're going to be entering a time when quite a lot of information will be available on the internet. Women on the Verge is putting out a resource list. My organization, Castle of Our Skins, has a resource list. And I really, really, really would love for teachers moving forward to spend some time in their semesters opening up spaces for students to talk about information that they've learned that they feel they wouldn't necessarily learn in the classroom. And I would love for educators to acknowledge the horrible tutelage of classical music history that has been employed over the past 100 or so years, right? And just make the time, make the space to have alternatives, to critique the texts that are used, really honestly engage in answering the question, why is this text problematic? Why is only analyzing Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms problematic? We need to keep on engaging with these questions and encouraging our students to engage with these questions, but also opening up ourselves as educators to being challenged by our students.
I think there's like a couple things that are really great to bring up or that have been brought up. And one is critiquing the syllabus the way that it is and the canon the way that it is, and not only what music we're learning, but how we're learning it and what kind of values that how is upholding. But also at the same time, understanding that if this is the type of music that that artists of color are coming to you to learn, that you have to also respect that position that we are coming from, and not say that because I'm coming from a certain position that I'm not able to learn classical music, or that you need to find another way to relate with me other than classical music. I think that these two things together are really important, to not try to rob people of color of their agency in your institutions, but to really take a deep look at the at the structures in the syllabus that you are using, and think about what kind of image of your institution that's giving people.
Yeah, I love that. And I think so much of like education and how we function in our industry is we do things as we're told, and we fit into our little slot. And honestly, our industry and even our educational system make us fight for scraps, you know? And when we're all fighting for these tiny, tiny scraps, standing up for another person and potentially risking your scraps seems catastrophic. So there's this larger thing that we need to also look at, which is, why are we not empathetic with each other? Why don't we stand up for each other? Why do we throw our colleague under the bus for that performance in sophomore year, you know, which happens all the time? And thinking critically about what you're reading and the things you're doing and the larger repercussions on your life are things we don't teach our students, things that we have to discover on our own outside the classroom. And what I'd love to see are teachers being like, well, why don't we look at these works by Black composers, but how do you treat Black people? How many Black people are in our school? Like, what are you doing with your community? You know, teaching students how to be critical and empathetic, talking to them about, if you have an opportunity, how do you expand that for other people? Don't let them wait till they're 29 to figure it out on their own, because they might not. Because they're gonna, at 29, they're just gonna be in the industry fighting for that one gig, and they're gonna think they don't have the time or capacity to do that. And that's our job, is to teach them how to make the time and capacity for that.
Yeah, I totally hear that. How we treat each other. I was offered a couple of opportunities to go on and do a doctorate, and I didn't say yes because I kind of had enough of the cattiness that is the vocal department. And there are so many vocal departments that run that way, and students are coming out emulating that in the working world. And it's not serving them, it's not serving anyone else. And they're all really good, sweet people. They've just learned a way of being that is unnecessary. And learning how to be a good colleague at school is something that I raised once with a teacher. It's like, why don't you teach a course in how to navigate a rehearsal and how to treat your colleagues. And I think that more recently I've been thinking, I was so shy for so long. I didn't know how to talk to a conductor. I didn't know until I got older and turned out the conductors are my friends. And you know, you just feel a little bit more, you have more agency, and they know you're a goofball, so you're not trying to hide that from anyone or what have you. But if we taught students how to have a conversation at that first meet and greet with the head honchos of the company and the donors who might show up, and the conductor and the director, and how to confront with grace if something is uncomfortable, or how to say no if they don't want to do this scene in their underwear or whatever. All of these things, and how to support each other is the main part of that. Like, if it's how to approach your colleague and say, are you comfortable with that? And do you want me to come with you to have that discussion or what have you? Like, if we were learning that in school, how to be good to each other, we'd be holding each other up, and it would take a lot of the weight away from some of those performances. And it doesn't, I'm not even talking about like the Indigenous stories, just like any opera. It's very often that something uncomfortable comes up. And if we learned how to be better colleagues in school, how much better would we be when we're in the opera chorus? How much better would we be when we're the person who is like playing the lead role and either ignoring the opera chorus or treating them like people, etc.
Sara, please. Yeah, no, I'm trying to also get to another question that has actually to do with this, but Sara, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I'll keep it short. I only wanted to say that I think we hear a lot that music schools are supposed to be kind of emulations of the real world or the real scene, but music schools are situations that create scarcity of opportunity, right? And then it leads to this idea that we can't be compassionate to one another because opportunities are limited and they only go to the best. And if you don't get it, someone else is going to get it. Or if you give an opportunity to someone else, that's taking an opportunity away from yourself. That's not what the real world is like. It's not like cake, you know, where like if you give something to somebody else, it means that you're going to lose out. It's that like if you try to create a supportive and compassionate and diverse scene and a good community that's artistically and personally and socially valuable, then everyone will be doing more projects and everyone will be supporting each other more and everyone will be getting more opportunities. So I think that school really doesn't set us up well for this idea that opportunities grow when you support each other. They don't go away.
Yeah, I know, right? So this actually has to do with process, right? Because there's a process that we have to follow to get there. And so in our pre-talk, we had a great conversation about permission versus process. And actually, we've had a couple people already in this webinar ask about different appropriation and the broader concept of permission versus process. We had somebody ask, what is the best practice for white performers and composers to engage in musical, other cultures' music without decentering the culture's full presence, things along those lines. So Ali, I'm actually going to turn over to you because you spoke so eloquently in our pre-talk.
Thank you. Just one thing to add to what we just talked about is like the concept of hierarchy is white supremacy. You know, like institutions that function where the people at the so-called bottom, the students or the singers, can't be involved in other ways. That is how racism continues, is because the people on the bottom aren't safe or able to engage in meaningful ways. We're just treated like cattle. But wrapping that up, moving on. The concept of permission versus process. The first thing I would say is what I said yesterday is a lot of us in the classical music world, a lot of people have their like one brown or black or indigenous or Latino friend. And if you're coming up with an idea and you're like, you know, what's going to make this idea work is I'm going to slide into their DMs and say, hey, is this okay? And if you're doing that, that's probably a pretty good sign that what you're doing needs more deep thought and process. Because you shouldn't be looking to Black and Brown and Indigenous and Latino people to give you permission to do this work. You should be looking to actually engage with the movement as a whole. And then once you do that, you'll understand that your work is more than just this one thing that you're asking for a green light for. And I mean, I speak for myself, but the number of things I get asked to go on and do that I look at them and I go, if I go on this, am I saying that this is okay? Because I know that's what my purpose is being asked to do it is, oh, Ali's on it. Ali's sort of a soft brown. It's okay now, you know? And I think one of the like big ways to avoid this issue, to avoid appropriation, to be actually engaged is just to commit to a longer process, to commit to really educating yourself, to commit to engaging with communities outside of the classical music community. You know, if you really, really want to write works and perform works about social justice, do some social justice in your life. You know, donate your money, volunteer your time, volunteer your resources. I mean, there's like a great Facebook group called Reparation Exchange where you can offer up your services and things like that, because then you're actually grounding yourself and take the time to see not just the concert at the end of the tunnel, but all the steps on the way, you know, like who am I talking to? Who am I paying? How am I talking to them? Am I giving them time and space? All of those things. And it's a long process. It's not easy, but it shouldn't be easy. Why does everything have to be easy? Why do white people get an easy pass at doing so many things? You know, that's not equitable and that's not fair. So time to change that up.
I had a really great example as a kid, and I only just realized it this month, of white people doing activism and why that's really helpful to us. And my English grandfather and my Irish Scottish grandmother living in Victoria, when they retired, became full-time activists. And it was so much their focus that for presents, we would give them like big markers to make their signs out of. And I don't know, it was like really, really serious. They were always standing in front of a logging truck or holding a sign on the Parliament building's lawn. And what that did is it taught me that they cared about Indigenous issues, and most of their issues were Indigenous or environmental, that they were standing up for. And they were like super quiet, polite people, but they were out there, putting their bodies out there to say, we need to be paying more attention to these issues where Indigenous people are being mowed over for extraction purposes. And what that did is it left us free as kids to like go take music lessons and to play, to learn, to be free in the world, because we didn't have to be doing that activism. And they were ready to speak up on our behalf. So that is just something I'm.
Okay, so yeah, if anybody else has something to say about that, great. I would love to hear it. But I also want to move into a little bit more of this academic experience versus lived experience, which we've already talked a little bit about and I think is super important. So what are the types of supports and mechanisms that need to be put in place so that a lived experience also has a place at the table? And Anthony, I'd love to ask you.
Yes, so I want to preface this by saying I don't think I'm 100% qualified to answer this question, but I'm going to do my best. And I also want to say that I'm not sure if this is true for everyone, but for me, I've learned much more outside of academia than I ever could within academia. So with that said, firstly, my friend Elizabeth Baker, who is a new Renaissance artist, her practice includes composition, performance, movement, spoken word, creative writing, professional writing, sound design, production, so much more. She often tells me about the power of the .edu email address. And when she first told me this, I thought it was completely ridiculous because I haven't had any difficulties using my Gmail account for email. But then she started telling me very specific stories. And after she told me those stories, I read and I heard about other situations where the .edu email address was somehow regarded with more clout. So it was my mistake to just think that her statement was ridiculous and not listen to her, even though this was a social conversation over the phone. But just listening to this story and how ridiculous it was really got me thinking much more critically about academia. So whoever is out there placing more weight on a .edu email address must be put in check right now. Secondly, granting organizations and ensembles, they usually run call for scores, call for proposals every year, and the standards in these calls are quite restrictive. We had some comments earlier on today about the restrictions for vocalists or instrumentalists getting into colleges and conservatories in the first place. You know, you have to perform that piece by Bach, and then that romantic piece, and then that 20th century piece. And if it's a 20th century piece, then ideally Ravel, right? Because Ravel is the 20th century's composer representative. But I think moving forward, granting organizations and ensembles putting out calls for scores and proposals and applications, they should do really, really radical things. For instance, why can't a major granting organization commit to 1 year where they're only accepting calls from BIPOC artists who haven't studied in a conservatory or a college, or perhaps only have gotten their bachelor's degrees, right? Why can't this happen? Because there are plenty of such artists out there who are working, and some of them contributing much more significantly than people who have gone through 6 to 8 to 12 years of academia, right? So this should just happen. We need to work on these types of opportunities. And lastly, when we do this work, we can't focus all of our attention on the non-academic backgrounds of the artists, right? We must only focus on their work and their accomplishments and their joy and their willingness to continue in a field that can be so divisive.
Great. Anthony, that was a wonderful answer. Thank you. I will say that I have used my EDU address as well. And I really appreciate you saying that, because now I have to rethink it all, and I'm excited to do that. Unfortunately, this conversation has to get wrapped up. Every time I'm like, oh, I just want to keep going. So you guys have so much experience and so much knowledge, and I'm so appreciative. So, but let's start with some short closing statements for everybody, and we're going to go in reverse order. So if everybody can turn their cameras and microphones off, but Marion, you leave yours on because you're going to be first. Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this. And I hope that the conversations continue in other ways. I look forward to seeing the changes that occur based on the reflecting that people are doing right now within the education system and in the opera world, performing, rehearsing, representing. And I just hope that people keep listening, because we're in one stage right now, but this is an ever-changing thing that we are dealing with, the idea of racism. And if we do peel away the layers and fix some of the issues, more things will arise, and we will always need to keep this conversation going. So thank you for including me.
Thanks. Anthony?
Yes, I want to echo what Marion said and what everybody has been saying. Thank you so much for having me and having such a powerful panel. My closing statement is really just think about this. If you are white right now and you are questioning your whiteness and how that fits in history and society, not only now, but in the past, and the role that you can play in the future, and you're feeling uncomfortable, I want you to think about this as you're thinking about your whiteness. As a Black person, all of my life, I've been challenged by my identity. And as a queer person, right, the whole narrative of queer people coming out, I was born in the 80s, so coming out was still a huge process, and it still is, right? But I remember once I asked my straight friends, when did you all come out as straight to your parents, right? And they all kind of laughed and took it as a joke. But this is kind of what's going on right now. When as a white person, if you're questioning your whiteness, it's really challenging your identity and challenging your sense of belonging, right? And it's much different than a queer person coming out and a Black person challenging their Blackness, right? But these types of confrontations must happen, these types of self-questioning. And I'm glad that so many white people are doing it right now, because it shouldn't just be the burden of BIPOC and queer people. So thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Sara?
Yeah, I just want to really echo and support what everyone else has already said. Thanks for having us, and thanks for getting these conversations started. And I think that now what would be really great to see is a continuation of this momentum and a continuation of these conversations beyond just now, this moment right now, but going forward. And also not only conversations, but action, and in your own lives, in our own lives, in the work that we're doing also. I don't think it's about being perfect or doing everything the right way, but it's about starting to advocate for change in the situations that we find ourselves in. And usually the best place, the best people to do some of that heavy lifting are the people who are not in the positions of vulnerability and who are in positions of safety where they're not going to be questioned. So let's start with some action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sara. And last but certainly not least, Ali.
Well, everybody just said so eloquently pretty much everything I was planning on saying. So I'll just say thank you so much, Women on the Verge, for having us. Thank you, Marion, Anthony, Sara, for sharing this space. And I guess if I was to say anything, is that I hope that people can start making concrete action plans for how they will engage with these things, for how they will engage with racial justice outside of classical music and within it, and make plans for what you're going to do this fall, what you're going to do this spring, what you're going to do next fall. Work backwards, work forwards, and see how those actions and steps can inform each other, and long-term plan to make actual lasting change. And I hope discussions like this will be happening 10 months from now. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I am feeling so incredibly uncomfortable right now, but also incredibly invigorated by the challenges that you've presented to us. I want to thank all of our audience for tuning in, and to everyone for submitting questions either in the chat today or to those who contributed prior to today in our Facebook group. Thank you to our panelists. I mean, we can't say thank you enough, but thank you again for sharing your experiences. Thank you to Emily for moderating, and for Kate for being behind the scenes with me today in the chat. There's already an extensive list of resources on the Women on the Verge webpage from our first webinar, and we will add to it the resources mentioned today. So feel free to check back for that downloadable PDF link. This webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel for replay beginning on Monday. Women on the Verge are committed to raising our voice to power and using it as a tool of justice, as Anthony so eloquently challenged us with earlier. So please join the Facebook group, Educating the Future Singer Post-COVID-19, so we can continue to carry on the conversation as charged by our panelists today. And finally, don't forget to head over to www.womenontheverge.ca to sign up for our newsletter, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Women on Verge to stay up to date with all of our upcoming conversations and projects. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.